I thought I was just saving two freezing kids from the street that night. I had no idea those twin brothers would end up saving my own children in ways I never imagined. What started as the worst financial decision of my life became the miracle that changed everything. My name is Jake Morrison, and if you stick with me through this story, you're going to witness something that'll restore your faith in how the universe works. Before we dive in, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now if you believe that sometimes the worst moments in our lives are actually doorways to our greatest blessings. And share this with someone who needs to remember that kindness always finds its way back to us, even when we can't see how. 2 years ago, my world collapsed when Sarah died in that car accident. One moment I had a partner, a teammate, someone to share the load with. The next moment I was staring at two beautiful kids, my 8-year-old daughter Emma and 10-year-old son Connor, wondering how the hell I was going to be enough for them. Sarah had been the organized one, the one who remembered school events and packed healthy lunches and somehow made our modest income stretch to cover everything we needed. Me? I was just the guy who came home covered in sawdust and concrete dust, grateful for her warm meals and warmer smile. After the funeral, reality hit like a sledgehammer. Construction work pays decent money, but not decent enough for a single dad trying to keep his head above water. I picked up every overtime shift I could find, working doubles and sometimes triples just to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. But it was never enough. Emma needed glasses. She'd been squinting at the blackboard for months, but the eye doctor visit alone would cost more than I made in 3 days. Connor was getting picked on at school because his sneakers had holes in them, and his jeans were hand-me-downs from a neighbor's kid who'd outgrown them 2 sizes ago. I remember sitting at our tiny kitchen table one evening, counting out coins and crumpled dollar bills, trying to figure out if we had enough for groceries that week. Emma was doing her homework by the light of that old lamp we'd moved from room to room because half the bulbs in the house had burned out, and I couldn't afford to replace them. Connor was at the stove, stirring a pot of mac and cheese. He'd learned to cook because I was working so many late shifts. 10 years old, and he was already carrying responsibilities that should have been mine. That's when the guilt would eat at me the most. These kids had already lost their mother, and now they had a father who was barely present, who couldn't provide them with the basics they deserved. Some nights I'd lie awake wondering if they'd be better off with someone else, someone who could give them stability and new clothes and the kind of childhood they were supposed to have. But then December came, and with it, the night that changed everything. I was driving home from another 14-hour shift, my truck's heater barely working, windshield fogging up from the cold. It was one of those brutal winter nights where the air cuts through your jacket like glass. I was bone tired, thinking about how I'd have to wake up in 5 hours to do it all over again, when I saw them. Two small figures huddled behind a dumpster near the old warehouse district. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. What would kids be doing out here at 11 at night in this cold? But as I slowed down, my headlights caught them clearly. Two little boys, maybe 6 years old, identical twins, pressed together for warmth with nothing but thin jackets that looked like they'd seen better days years ago. They were dirty, scared, and shivering so hard I could see it from 20 feet away. I pulled over and got out, my boots crunching on the frozen ground. The boys looked up at me with eyes that held too much fear for faces so young. They were malnourished, hollow-cheeked, and when I knelt down to their level, I could see they'd been living rough for a while. These weren't kids who just wandered off from home. These were children who had nowhere else to go. "Hey there," I said softly, trying not to scare them more than they already were. "What are your names?" The smaller one whispered, "Caleb," while pointing to himself, then to his brother, Elijah. Their voices were barely audible over the wind. Standing there in that moment, with my own kids at home struggling with problems I couldn't solve, looking down at these two babies who had absolutely nothing, I felt something shift inside me. Logic screamed that I couldn't help them. I could barely take care of my own children. My bank account was overdrawn, my rent was 3 days late, and I had $4.37 to my name until payday. But sometimes the heart makes decisions that the mind can't understand. Sometimes compassion doesn't wait for permission from common sense. "Get in the truck, boy," I heard myself saying. "Nobody sleeps in the cold tonight." Walking through my front door with Caleb and Elijah behind me was like stepping into a whole new reality. Emma and Connor looked up from the couch where they'd been waiting for me, and I watched their faces cycle through confusion, curiosity, and something that might have been relief. Maybe they were tired of being the only kids in a house that felt too empty, too quiet without their mother's laughter filling the spaces between us. Dad? Emma's voice was small, uncertain. Who are they? I knelt down so I was eye level with all four of them, my heart hammering against my ribs. This is Caleb and Elijah. They're going to stay with us for a while. The words came out steadier than I felt. In my head, I was already doing the impossible math. 4 kids, 1 bathroom, not enough beds, definitely not enough food. But looking at those twin boys still shivering despite the warmth of our house, I knew there was no other choice I could live with. That first week nearly broke me. Caleb had severe asthma, and his attacks were terrifying. Watching a 6-year-old struggle to breathe while you're helpless to do anything but hold him and pray. Elijah wouldn't speak to anyone except his brother, communicating in whispers and hand signals like they'd developed their own secret language during their time on the streets. I'd find them both sleeping on the floor beside Emma and Connor's beds, too afraid to trust that a mattress meant safety. The grocery situation was catastrophic. What little food we had disappeared in 2 days instead of lasting the week. I found myself standing in the cereal aisle at 3 in the morning, calculator in hand, trying to figure out how to feed 4 kids on $37. I started skipping meals, telling myself I wasn't that hungry anyway, just so there'd be enough for them. But kids notice everything. Connor started saving half his sandwich for me, and Emma began insisting she was too full after a few bites. My boss, Rick, called me into his office after I showed up late for the 3rd time in a week. Caleb had been up all night coughing, and I couldn't leave until I was sure he was okay. Jake, I get that you're going through something, Rick said, his voice carrying that tone that meant my job was hanging by a thread. But this crew depends on everyone showing up ready to work. Figure it out, or I'll have to find someone who can. The neighbors started talking. Mrs. Chen from next door knocked on my door with a casserole and questions that felt more like accusations wrapped in concern. Those boys don't look like they belong to you, she said, peering past me into the house. Have you called the proper authorities? I could see her calculating, wondering if she should be the one to make that call. But something beautiful was happening inside our walls, even as everything outside felt like it was falling apart. Emma, who'd been quiet and withdrawn since losing her mother, came alive taking care of Caleb and Elijah. She shared her few toys without hesitation, read them bedtime stories in voices that made them giggle, and somehow transformed from a grieving 8-year-old into this fierce little protector. Connor, who'd been angry at the world since the accident, found his purpose standing between the twins and the kids at school who thought it was funny to make fun of their second-hand clothes in shy silence. In our garage, with its concrete floor and bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, I started teaching all 4 boys basic carpentry. Connor had always shown interest in building things, but now Caleb and Elijah watched with intense focus as I showed them how to measure twice and cut once, how to feel the grain of the wood, how to create something useful with your hands. Those were the moments when Elijah would forget to be silent, asking questions about angles and joints with a curiosity that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with this work in the first place. The breakthrough came on a Thursday night when Elijah spoke his first full sentence to me. We were all crowded around our tiny kitchen table, a card table I'd bought at a garage sale years ago, sharing a pot of spaghetti that Emma had learned to make. Caleb was laughing at something Connor had said, and for a moment, it felt like we were a real family instead of a collection of broken pieces trying to fit together. Thank you, Mr. Jake, Elijah said quietly, his voice clear and certain, for not driving away. That's when it hit me that these boys weren't just staying with us temporarily. Somewhere along the way, without any official papers or court decisions, they'd become mine. Emma was their sister now, Connor their protective big brother, and I was the only father figure they'd ever really known. But just as I was starting to believe we might actually make this work, everything began to unravel. The eviction notice came on a Friday. Our landlord, Mr. Patterson, had been getting complaints about overcrowding and decided 4 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment violated his lease terms. Then Rick followed through on his threat, letting me go after I missed another day when Caleb ended up in the emergency room. The power company shut off our electricity the next week, and suddenly we were sitting in darkness, literally and figuratively. I found myself crying alone in that dark kitchen, wondering if my heart had written a check my circumstances couldn't cash. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe I wasn't equipped for this. Maybe these boys deserved better than a man who couldn't even keep the lights on. What I didn't know was that while I was falling apart, my kids were putting me back together in ways I couldn't see. Emma had been struggling with her math homework for weeks, and I'd been too exhausted and distracted to help her the way she needed. But one morning I found her at that card table with Elijah, both of them bent over her workbook, and she was getting every problem right. Elijah's been helping me, she said with a smile brighter than any I'd seen since Sarah died. He's really good at numbers. I looked at the work they'd done together, and my blood went cold. These weren't simple addition problems. Elijah had taken Emma's basic math and turned it into complex equations that would challenge a high school student. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged like it was nothing. Numbers make sense, he said. People don't always, but numbers do. That's when Connor brought me Caleb's notebook. While we'd all been worried about his asthma and his quiet nature, Caleb had been watching everything. Our grocery receipts, our bills, the way I counted and recounted our money each week. He'd created a detailed budget analysis that put my amateur attempts to shame. He'd identified exactly where our money was going, found places we could save, and even calculated how much we'd need to get back on our feet. "Mr. Jake," Caleb said, his voice still soft but determined, "you're not bad with money. You just don't have enough of it. But if we move some things around, and if you get a job that pays what you're worth, we can make this work." I stared at these two 6-year-old boys who had just solved problems that had been keeping me awake at night, and I realized something that changed everything. I hadn't rescued them that night. They'd been waiting for me, ready to rescue us all along. Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's teacher, noticed the dramatic improvement in her math scores and asked to meet with me. When I explained about Elijah, she insisted on testing both twins. What we discovered left everyone speechless. Caleb and Elijah weren't just bright kids. They were mathematical prodigies, the kind you read about in newspapers, with IQs that put them in the top fraction of a percent globally. "Mr. Morrison," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice filled with excitement, "these boys have gifts that could change their lives completely, but they need proper nurturing, specialized education." She paused, studying my face. "They need exactly what you've been giving them: stability, love, and someone who believes in them." That's when she did something that changed everything. She shared our story with a local journalist friend, not for publicity, but because she believed people needed to hear about what real family looked like. The article was simple. Local father takes in homeless twins, discovers their geniuses. But somehow it caught fire. Within days, my phone was ringing constantly. The construction company I'd always wanted to work for offered me a foreman position after reading about my character. A local family foundation reached out about sponsoring all 4 kids' education. Neighbors I'd never met showed up with groceries, clothes, and offers to help. The community I'd felt judged by suddenly embraced us with an outpouring of support that left me speechless. But the most incredible call came from Dr. Sarah Chen. Yes, the same Mrs. Chen who'd questioned me about the boys. Her daughter was a pediatric specialist who'd read the article. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology, and my daughter wants to help with Caleb's asthma treatment, free of charge." 1 year later, I'm standing in the courthouse watching a judge make it official. "By the power vested in me by the state, I hereby grant this adoption petition. Emma, Connor, Caleb, and Elijah, officially and forever, the Morrison family." Emma has her glasses now, and she's reading 3 grade levels above her peers. Connor's confidence has transformed him into a natural leader at school. Caleb's asthma is managed, and he's working with university professors on mathematical concepts most adults can't grasp. Elijah still speaks softly, but when he talks about the technology he and Caleb are developing to help other homeless children, his voice carries the weight of someone who's going to change the world. We live in a real house now, with enough bedrooms for everyone and a workshop where I teach neighborhood kids carpentry on weekends. But more than that, we live with the daily proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are doorways to miracles we never could have imagined. Looking back, I realize I had it backwards that cold December night. I thought I was saving two freezing boys from the street, but the truth is, Caleb and Elijah were sent to save us, to show Emma and Connor what unconditional love looks like, to teach me that family isn't about biology, it's about choice, and to prove that when you open your heart despite your circumstances, the universe has a way of opening doors you didn't even know existed. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to remember that kindness always comes back to us, just not always in the ways we expect. Subscribe for more stories that prove love multiplies when we give it away. And remember, sometimes the best decisions we make are the ones that seem impossible at the time.